Reaction pouring in to Kristi Noem being replaced at the Department of Homeland Security. We'll also focus on Pennsylvania and America's talking. This is the Center Square Daily for Friday, March 6th, 2026. I'm your host, Greg Bishop. Senate Democrats tanked the Department of Homeland Security funding bill for the third time Thursday, ensuring the department's funding lapse will continue at least 21 days. With no federal funding, Department of Homeland Security employees deemed essential include TSA agents and most members of FEMA, the Coast Guard, and the Secret Service. They must still show up to work during a shutdown while the rest are furloughed. While those agencies haven't closed, they have ceased non-essential operations. The Center Square's Therese Boudreau reports 3 American citizens having been killed during protests against immigration enforcement agents. Democrats in Congress are voting against the latest remaining 2026 appropriations bill until it includes new restrictions on those federal immigration operations. Now, Democrats' policies demanding include prohibiting DHS agents from wearing masks, racially profiling, indiscriminately arresting people, tracking protesters, or entering private property without a judicial warrant, in addition to an immigration court warrant, among several other policy initiatives Democrats are pushing. Now, the Trump administration has already agreed to some of those demands, such as requiring body-worn cameras for DHS agents and ending roving patrols. And now there's a shakeup at the agency with Secretary Kristi Noem being replaced. President Donald Trump made the announcement in a lengthy post on Truth Social Thursday morning, confirming reports circulating through Washington. He said Oklahoma U.S. Senator Markwayne Mullin will become the United States Secretary of Homeland Security effective March 31st. Noem, who Trump thanked for her service in his statement, will be reassigned as the special envoy for the Shield of Americas. We're expecting more details on that position to be announced this weekend. Now, before being sworn into the new position at DHS, Mullin will need to be confirmed in the Republican majority Senate. The remainder of his term in the U.S. Senate through January 3rd will be filled by the choice of Republican Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt. Now, Mullin, who won his 6-year term in the Senate in 2022 and had been scheduled for a June 16th Republican primary, it's unclear what happens there. It's also unclear if having Mullin as the new DHS secretary will sway Democrats to get their support to fund DHS operations. Now, this is the second time in less than 6 months that Democrats have forced a shutdown over policy demands in Washington, with the most recent government shutdown lasting a record-long 43 days. Now, reaction from various leaders of the states, including California, Illinois, and Minnesota. You can see where Democrats might be thinking. Governor Gavin Newsom posted a moving image of Noem on social media that just said, "In memoriam." In Minnesota, Governor Tim Walz, he posted on X, quote, "Kristi Noem has done a stunning amount of damage, and it's good she's gone." Walz further said, "This doesn't change the fact that we need a complete overhaul of DHS," he said, quote, "Impartial investigations into the killing of 2 American citizens and information on children that were taken from Minnesota." In Minnesota, the county prosecutors opened investigations into more than a dozen incidents involving federal agents participating in that Operation Metro Surge. The Center Square's Elise Apel reports Hennepin County Attorney Mary Mortuary made the announcement that her office would be launching that portal to collect photos and videos from the public to identify potentially illegal behavior by federal agents. Similar moves in Illinois, where Governor J.B. Pritzker has called for Noem's firing for weeks. He reacted to the news Thursday morning in Springfield.
Well, she shouldn't let the door hit her on the way out, and it's frankly not too soon. I hope that her replacement, who I guess was named at the same time, does a better job. It's a pretty low bar. Frankly, we saw shootings, and we saw breaking the law, we saw corruption under Kristi Noem, and so I'm not sure you could do worse.
Pritzker recently created the Illinois Accountability Commission to investigate wrongdoing by immigration enforcement agents. That commission, having met several times to take testimony, is expected to produce a report soon. From states reacting to a shakeup at DHS and the ongoing partial government shutdown, let's now turn our focus to Pennsylvania with the Center Square regional editor Christen Smith. Christen, your latest story about Pennsylvania's power load buckling under neighboring renewable energy goals. Interesting as it's going to impact people's cost for energy. But what was the warning from Pennsylvania Public Utilities this week?
The big warning is that Pennsylvania can really no longer be the backbone of the power grid. And as a result, we will not be able to stave off the price increases and potential for rolling blackouts that other regions of this country have experienced because of an increase of renewable energy resources. In the PJM power grid, which stands for Pennsylvania, Jersey, Maryland, we provide 25% of that base load generation. Now, it's important to understand that that's not just for Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Maryland. That's for states as far flung as Illinois, and we have the DC area, parts of North Carolina. 67 million people really rely on our energy resources in Pennsylvania. We're a huge energy exporter. A lot of our economy is really dependent and intertwined with this identity of natural resources that we have. And so for a long time, the goals of surrounding states, New Jersey, Maryland, they have really focused on decarbonization in their energy sector. And that means a lot of wind and solar power. But they've been able to keep prices low and keep the lights on reliably because they can turn to Pennsylvania and all of our natural gas and our nuclear, and to a lesser extent, our coal plants. And that is something that, given the rise in data centers, we are going to struggle to keep up with that load, particularly because the incentivization for solar and wind has really outpaced the incentivizing for natural gas plants. So even though Pennsylvania has a lot of opportunity and room left for natural gas, investors have been looking elsewhere because of the change in policy regarding our energy resource mix. So we're really getting into this tight situation as far as supply and demand.
And we're also seeing very similar warnings in other states, including, as you mentioned, Illinois, where they have a decarbonization effort to possibly take away coal-fired power plants and natural gas-fired power plants by 2035 and 2040, and the possible burden that's going to put on the grid. And obviously the country's split up with all of these different energy networks of sorts that oversee energy production. But this is going to be a story we're going to have to continue to track, with Pennsylvania being so rich in natural resources and states like Illinois having a lot of coal under the ground. All of this while you've got certain types of policies from more left-leaning states looking for solar, wind, and battery storage, while the Trump administration is looking to no longer subsidize those things. So that battle is going to continue. But Christen, from concerns over energy costs and reliability, Pennsylvania drivers have another cost that they have to take up. Tell us what is happening with the state's toll roads, and just how much does it cost to drive across the state of Pennsylvania?
To go from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia and the New Jersey border, you're looking at $113. Now, to be clear, that's not a huge proportion of our trips, but that is certainly among the highest in the country. And it's not been a secret in Pennsylvania for a very long time that we have expensive tolls. They've gone up in recent years as our turnpike has had to make contributions to our state transportation network and to upgrading our roads and bridges, and that is something we still continue to struggle with, but that's a story for another day. And part of this study that was done, not only is Pennsylvania the fourth highest of the 27 states with tolls, but you also have Delaware, Maryland, and New Jersey and New York. And the reason that the way that they look into these is because they look at the cost per trip for drives. And so even though perhaps Delaware has generated a lot less revenue from their tolls, the cost per trip is far more expensive in comparison. But even so, you're looking at, prices that are somewhat, if not extremely burdensome for a lot of people, particularly in regions where they have to do a lot of commuting, particularly in these larger cities, or even in our Harrisburg area. You have a lot of people who commute back and forth, and the turnpike is a really convenient option, but ever more expensive.
Well, you got to think too, is the cost of traveling through, as you mentioned. Pennsylvania toll revenues bring in a considerable amount of money, but when it costs $113 just to drive across the state, what does that mean for commercial drivers? Looking at some of the other statistics from your story at thecentersquare.com, the money's going somewhere, right? I mean, you got $8 billion since 2007 that was paid for by drivers using these roads.
Right. But as anyone might suggest, we have some of the worst roads and bridges in the country. So even though we've got $8 billion coming to the state over the last decade and a half, 2 decades at this point, that hasn't amounted to much, probably in the eyes of most taxpayers, right? So we still have a lot of work to do around what the tolls are getting us for our money.
Christen, finally, let's touch a bit more on a local story out of Pittsburgh, one that a lot of other larger cities are grappling with, and that's the effectiveness of gun spotting technologies and some questions about the taxpayer cost. Pittsburgh's taking up this very question when it comes to ShotSpotter. What's the latest there?
So Pittsburgh is reconsidering a contract that it has been with ShotSpotter. It was set to expire this past December. In my conversations with ShotSpotter, they told me that it was renewed, but Pittsburgh City Council seems to be reconsidering, although they have not confirmed with me their timeline or their view of the contract. But their argument is that ShotSpotter may not be worth the money and that it's not more effective than calling 911. They are also concerned that it worsens community relations in these neighborhoods that have a historical high rates of gun violence. And so there's a lot of question from city residents who say, why are we spending this money? And this surveillance technology isn't really resulting in a lot of arrests, in their opinion, for gun-related violence, and that it often leads to arrests for other things. ShotSpotter, on the other hand, they talked with me at the Center Square and said that Pittsburgh has not complained to them directly about the issue of false positives or the effectiveness of the system. And in fact, their response times to emergency calls for ShotSpotter have gotten better by 5 minutes. So that is a very big improvement for them. So there seems to be a lot of disconnect between what the city council is concerned about and what they've expressed to ShotSpotter.
And ShotSpotter is a technology that's being employed not just in major urban areas, but you've got shopping malls and other areas that are going to be using this technology. But 100 different cities, Christen, are using this. In Chicago, as you reported in your story, just kind of looking at how other cities have handled this, they've canceled their ShotSpotter contract.
Yeah, and it was my understanding a very controversial decision that's now been under scrutiny since the mayor went through with this plan. And now that there was a recent incident, a murder, that the body was not found until 10 hours later, even though an off-duty police officer had called 911 and given very specific locations of the gunshots fired. So that is a very direct example of how 911 may not be better than ShotSpotter. And so Chicago's a very prime example of going back on this technology. But you have other cities who, again, according to ShotSpotter, have been very devoted, have expanded the reach of ShotSpotter. And in Pittsburgh itself, the company told me that initially the city wanted to have every part of it covered by ShotSpotter, but that would be economically unfeasible and a waste of money. And so the company recommended against that. And so the city council was again tasked with picking the neighborhoods where these technologies are. And again, they have a 1% rate of false positives. And so there's a very limited amount of calls. It's also important to note that just because police respond to a ShotSpotter call, it's not in their control of whether evidence is found of a crime. The person who perpetrated it may have fled the scene. There's a lot of reasons why every call may not result in arrest.
That's right. Yeah, and the overall cost to taxpayers, $8.5 million just in Pittsburgh. And of course, some of the statistics that you have in your story, about 2,394 alerts, capturing more than 8,500 rounds fired. But still the questions about the effectiveness of that, I imagine that's going to be an ongoing debate in Pittsburgh. Now it's time for America's Talking with headlines from across the country. In Ohio, the Center Square contributor David Beasley reports a former fiscal officer for the village of New Concord stole more than $450,000, has now been sentenced to 7 years in prison. The state launching an investigation after being contacted by village officials who were contacted by a bank, saying that there was questions about a long dormant village account. Well, the restitution, more than $475,000 being ordered, and in New Concord, which is 75 miles east of Columbus, we got about 2,100 people and is also the boyhood home of astronaut and U.S. Senator John Glenn. In New York, drivers paying some of the highest car insurance rates already, over $4,000 annually. That's nearly $1,500 more than the national average. But as the Center Square contributor Chris Wade reports, New York Governor Kathy Hochul looking to crack down on those costs, looking to possibly modify state law about fraud and staged accidents, but it's facing some opposition from various groups, including those in the religious space. The plan looks to tackle some of which is requiring legislation to strengthen state regulations, ramp up investigations, and more, but you've got a coalition of religious leaders saying that the proposed changes, if they're approved by the legislature in New York, would, quote, protect large insurance companies and corporate platforms while shifting the financial consequences of injury onto the victims. In California, the Center Square's Madeline Shannon reports top officials from both of that state's university systems testifying that federal budget cuts are going to impact research and operations. They're praising Governor Gavin Newsom's budget. Now, the money supports not just research at the University of California campuses. University officials say it also pays salaries for research employees, graduate students, and technicians. More than $1 billion in research money could be impacted by those federal cuts. That was found in H.R. 1 from last year, the so-called One Big Beautiful Bill Act. According to California State University study, more than 210,000 jobs are paid for by taxpayer dollars in the university system. And in Washington State, the Center Square's Randy Diamond reports Seattle Mayor Katie Wilson announcing a plan to create 1,000 new shelter beds and emergency housing by the end of the year to deal with the city's homelessness crisis. Wilson said the plan will be funded by $4.8 million in city funds. $3.3 million would be appropriated from underutilized revolving loan programs that was difficult to deploy. Well, that's it for America's Talking here for the Center Square Daily. From my studios in Central Illinois, I'm Greg Bishop, and join us back here Monday for more stories impacting you, the taxpayer, from around the country, only with the Center Square Daily.